step. We want to have the very best plan possible for all of the eventualities, right? And ranging across all of the potential choices that a family can make also in terms of their how they're going to interact with the district in the opening of the fall. So your feedback is essential in order to bring perspectives to how we make those plans, all of them, all of the different options, the very best possible. So we'll be spending most of our time on that today. And just to remind you, yes, please, Sherry.
I have a question, and because I'm getting asked a lot of questions from teachers and from parents in the community. So the district's work group, that as it's listed, could we get a list of the names on that work group? Because teachers are assuming that I'm on the work group and I'm not. And so I would just like to get a listing of the names so I can let them know who is on the work group.
Sure, we can get that for you.
Thank you.
You bet. You bet. So just to remind everybody, I mean, that kind of brings up the great distinction. What this committee is here for is to provide 10,000-foot level and to give feedback on the plans that are coming from the work group, and to eventually give the recommendation to Justin as to whether to take this forward to the board or not for their approval. It's not to get into the details. And I know that in some respects there's a contradiction in there, because I'm asking you for feedback. Your feedback is really essential in terms of giving the work group ideas about whether we've missed some important features that need to be considered, or we've taken a broad enough view, or we're going to, because we've been really idealistic about how we've been moving forward, that there is some oncoming train at the end of the tunnel that we have missed, right, in terms of how to implement this thing. I'm working with this similar project in another district, and they're 1 week ahead of you. They started a week early. And it is now becoming clear how enormous the task of actually implementing the recommendation of the committee is going to be. So it's really important for your voice is essential to this, because you've got all of the different perspectives that are going to help inform that. So just wanted to keep us in the right place around where we are. As you know, we have looked at some primary considerations. The ones that came out of this district are really, I think, very powerful. As Justin said, safety is really central. And again, I mean, you know, that's our work in schools. I was a high school teacher, principal, and football coach in different times for 20 years. And the number one thing in all of those roles was to ensure student safety. So that's crucial, and you've chosen that as one of your guiding principles in this work. Equity, plans that give priority to students who need the most attention and resource. The very best possible learning experience, it's number 3. Flexibility, students, staff, family, individual circumstances need to be addressed. Sustainability is going to be a real challenge, and it's important for you to have it in here, but the logistics, the consistency, and the district's ability to deliver on the plan without breaking the budget. And I would also say, as I'm doing this work in a lot of districts, without breaking the budget and without breaking people, without breaking staff, who are going to give their utmost in service of the children and the community, and who have limits in terms of their capacity to do that over time as well. And then the notion of community partnership, consistent care and communication, and making certain that the community is involved in that. So that's that's the primary considerations that you've established. You did a very nice job with that. And it's just a reminder as we now shift into the technical work that we're going to be doing now. Those are the defining characteristics that you're going to be evaluating these plans on and giving feedback on them. Any questions or any thoughts before we launch in? Well, thank you. There's a little bit of somberness in the group, and I don't know if I've been too taciturn in moving here, and I hope not. But I think we've got the tone set for the work today. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Kim Whitworth, who is going to present a deeper dive into the option alternatives. She's going to give us some really good information, and then we're going to get into breakout groups, and we're going to, I'll go into this more, but we're going to have a specific agenda for your work in the breakout groups. We're going to be in the breakout groups for a period of time, and then you're going to come back and report on those ideas. But I'm just going to turn it over to Kim for presentation.
Thank you, Spencer. Okay, I'm going to screen share screen. So hang on just a second. Okay, if everybody remembers, when we started out, we let you know that we had 5 different options that we took to our school leaders, and we asked them which of these options did they feel like they would be able to really successfully implement. And we brought back option A and option B1 and option B2. And after discussion with all of you, we realized that option B1 had at that time the most support. So what we would like to do today is just to kind of briefly go over this again and have you flesh out some of the important details that we need to consider as we're looking at option B. Option B1 is actually something that other districts are starting to consider, or they're starting to recommend to their school board. And it's just this idea, again, that we have little kids who are 5 and 6 years old and who are at the very start of their official public school career, and learning to read and learning to write and learning to do math is really foundational to everything they're going to be doing for the rest of their careers and their lives and all of that. So what we liked about this, what it seems like other districts are liking about this, and I think some of the feedback from you was that this would provide our students who are the most vulnerable in terms of learning loss and need for foundational support, what they probably are going to need to be successful. So with that in mind, please remember that all of the things in this option are still variable. We can still flex on it. So depending on enrollment, all kindergarten through 2nd grade students in school 4 days a week spread out over multiple buildings. It could be all kindergarten. It could be all kindergarten 1. It could be all kindergarten 2. I think it would depend on how many kids that we have. Spread out over multiple buildings as needed is another piece to this. And one of the things that we were reading in, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I can't remember the school district right now. Another school district in terms of transportation was you would go to the building that was closest to where you lived. And then they were talking about secondary would have just a little bit more flexible schedule, and most of it online, some of it in person, just depending on what was needed. So you should have this. This is from our last meeting. So in addition to just that first bullet, which is kind of like, okay, here's the overview, we have special education and 3 through 5, English language learners, some other ideas going on here. For secondary, what it would be is all 612 students in school 2 days a week, split into 2 groups. There's some options where we could connect there where, you know, days off would be aligned by family so that when the older kiddos are in school, we make sure the younger kiddos are in school. So there's some things that we need to consider and do that way. We had some pros and challenges, benefits and costs with all of this. And of course, the early readers and the mathematicians, categorical programs, having the maximum amount of support. Some challenges have to do with facilities, with transportation, with staffing that would have to be adjusted. And then we had in here some dollar amounts and all of that. So 5 different scenarios, 5 different options to 3 that we put in front of you. And then this was the one that had the most support. So after seeing that, what we asked was, what would it take to make option B1 more viable? We had 2 comments that I could find that had to do with option B1. And the first one is, you can see there's 2 paragraphs here. They believe that to make this really viable, we would need to have breakout subcommittees that focus on specific programs, which I completely agree. It was such a great idea. So you have a K3 subcommittee, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, Sky Valley, Leaders in Learning, because each of those grade bands and these schools have really different needs, just depending on pedagogical best practices and all of that. So the second comment that we had in regards to B1, how do we utilize extra space? And again, it was pointed out that, you know, if we have K2, how would we make sure that 312 would have 4 days a week? And so that's something that we'd have to work through. What are some different options? What are some ideas? Transportation was another one. And I think in addition to looking around at other districts, we've got Mike Birch, who is an amazing transportation leader. And I think we can come up with some solutions there. The last piece in the comment that I highlighted here is that 2 days in a row for in-class learning is better than splitting the days throughout the week. And we hear a lot of different things. One is 2 days in a row. It provides some continuity. It's really easy to remember for families. It's maybe a little bit easier for teachers. Another idea in that is, but if it's Monday and Wednesday and Tuesday and Friday, then teachers can maybe teach kind of the same lesson to two groups of kids, have some time to evaluate, reflect, think about it, see the kids at the end of the week. We've also heard that Mondays might be a better day to have off because of holidays and stuff like that. We've also heard the idea that maybe it should be Group A is week 1, Group B is the next week. And so you're alternating weeks instead of days. So even within option B1, there's a lot of things that we can consider to mitigate any of the challenges that we've identified. So as Spencer said, we're going to spend most of our time getting into breakout rooms, and the charge or the questions that we have here are breakout rooms will discuss proposal B1, identifying challenges that need to be addressed with the option. And I'm going to add on there, open to solutions, ideas. Some of you who are sitting in the classroom or sitting in the office or sitting in transportation or facilities or categorical programs may have some solutions that I'm pretty sure you have some solutions that we haven't thought of. So in addition to identifying those challenges, I would love to hear possible solutions. Further details needed and other questions that we need to address. So with that, that's kind of the big overview. And I'm wondering, Spencer, if we want to take any clarifying questions before we move, or it's up to you at this point.
Sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Sorry, I surprised you. I know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This would be a time for the whole group to ask any clarifying questions about what you're hoping for them to do in the breakout session, and any clarifying questions about this B1 proposal. And let's see here. And I'm just going to ask people to jump in if they have, because I can't see the whole screen with the document up.
Has there been any discussion on half day versus full day, or, you know, how many hours of the day this would be?
So I need to make sure that Justin, you can jump in as well. Our understanding is that we are going to be required to provide 6 hours of instruction opportunities for students. That doesn't mean that it has to be the full day. It could be that kids are in school for 4 hours a day. Then when they're at home, they have access to a physical education, opportunity, or arts, or music, or we have 2 amazing like elementary teachers right now that are putting together some opportunities for some learning at science learning at home. So my understanding is that the 6 hours of learning opportunity has to be there, but it does not specify that it has to be in the building.
So it's a really great question, Michael. And I know some districts are looking at a morning session and an afternoon session where the A group attends in the morning and then the B group attends in the afternoon. One of the pieces that we've talked to Mike about with that is the logistical challenge of sanitizing the buses between all of the routes. That adds another transition in there. It's not I'm not derailing that. If that's, again, to Spencer's comment earlier, this is where we're throwing the spaghetti against the wall. This is where we're really working on what is going to be best for our community in Monroe. And so I know that, for example, Sultan School District, and I was the building principal up there for 4 years or 5 years, something like that. They are considering an A-B day, and moving that between, and then shifting some of that time, expanding the day. Again, all of this is different than our current collective bargaining agreements, and that's the same for Sultan. So all of that has to be bargained still. But I know that was one of the ideas that they're kicking around. I think, one of the things that I would really like to get feedback on today, to emphasize Kim's desire for some solutions, is, the high school is really, there's a lot of really great ideas that seem to be being generated around elementaries and what do elementaries look like. When it becomes really challenging is when you're talking about, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so thinking around 9, 10, 11, 12 would also be really good for us to think about as far as what that would be. Now, and I know that, accessing distance learning for a 17-year-old is very different than accessing distance learning for a 7-year-old. And I think that's why we tend to hyper focus on K-5. But some ideas generated around our secondary level, our middle school level, our high school level would also benefit us. But again, I think that directly answering Michael's question, I don't think we're quite there yet. And this concept of like work teams and work groups, after we really kind of say, okay, yes, this is what we want to flesh out more. We want to really spend a lot of time thinking about what does B1 look like? How many K, how many 1s, how many 2s could we fit into the building, and those pieces. So I think everything's open. I think we're still open to those kinds of concepts and thinking. The other piece that I was just going to add is a lot of things have been moving as far as the State Board of Education has given us latitude around graduation, the things that they can do outside of the Legislative Act. We will still be required to have 24 credits for graduation because that is a legislative decision. That is something that is law. But the State Board of Education has given us a lot of latitude, and what Kim was referring to has to do with the time and the days. So, and this is getting into the geek factor, but that's why you're all here. We get to learn so much about how this whole thing works. 1,027 hours is the average that a school district has to have K-12 to be compliant with state law or school board, State Board of Education regulations. And they're saying that there's going to be flexibility in what we can count, and that is what Kim was referring to, is that has always been based on seat time, if you will. And what they're suggesting is that they understand that many of us and most of us are looking at a hybrid model. And so there will be acceptance or identification of that hybrid model when we're able to demonstrate that. And the great thing about what we've done leading up to this point is that we have Canvas. We have a lot of collaborative tools within Google Classroom that are embedded in Camp. There's a lot of ways that we can demonstrate that students are engaged in the learning process, even when they're not directly in front of our teaching staff. And that's really where that 2.0 comes with. How do we learn from what happened in the spring and make that even better moving forward, which is what all of us want to do. So, and then the last thing I would say is we did have a conversation about food, and knowing that you know, we have some Title I schools in our district. We have some schools that are approaching Title I status, very close to that 40% free and reduced. And there has been, and we have Kelly Hazlip is on our committee. Kelly is our liaison between our the Monroe School District and Chartwells, who we have a contract with to deliver food service. And they have U.S. Department of or U.S. what is it, the Food and Drug, one of USD, I think. They have allowed us to say that we can send meals home with kids. We can do prepackaged meals, which is very different than the normal day-to-day routine. And so we should have some ability to be flexible with the opportunity to continue to provide nutrition to our students within the structure of a hybrid A-B day as well. So that was really good news that came out, I believe, at the end of last week, and that we've been talking about this week. So there's these entities that are overseeing and have these regulations are also adapting to the circumstance that we're dealing with and are providing us some remedy to that as well as we move forward. And so some of the really smart thinking that's been happening with this committee around food, around care, and around those pieces, we've seen our federal partners to identify those things too moving forward. So we should have some solutions to be able to build into that as well.
Great. Any other clarifying questions?
I was wondering if Kim could move the page up to the top again with just to review B1 again, so we can all look at it real quick before we break into our groups.
Yes, and I am so sorry. You should have gotten the option A, B1, B2 the last time, because we haven't changed that. This right here with the 2 comments and then the breakout proposal discussion questions is new. So as soon as we're done looking at my screen, I'm also going to send it to Erin so she can email it to everybody. But until then, I will move up. But please know, option B has not changed. I'm sorry, option B1 has not changed since the last time we looked at it.
Great, thank you. Any other clarifying questions?
So we're just focused on this B1 right now?
Yes.
Okay, we're not focusing on any other options?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
And Kaylee, that is a good question, because I mean, from 5 to 3 to this one, I think what we realized was that even with B1, we have some opportunities to flex it. So it's B1, but it's probably B1 1.0, B1 2.0. I think there's still a lot of flexibility with this option.
Thank you. Any last clarifying question before we spin out into groups? Okay.
Actually, I do have one.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Of course I would. So the feds this week have been real talkative about last week, or during the week, about changing all of the stuff for schools reopening and demanding. So this group has done a lot of work planning for school reopening. And if they bring out their grand ideas that are different than what we've already worked to, I just want to know, are we going to stick to what appears to be the safest way to do these kids, get them back in school and protect everybody? Or are we going to have to flip to something different for money or anything else?
Are you referring to information coming out of the Federal Department of Education?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to answer that. The district has to follow the state guidelines. The state guidelines have precedence over federal guidelines on education, and that's just constitutionally true, number one.
Okay.
And number two, they do have a financial hammer that they can use, but it's a fairly small percentage of the overall budget. So but it's a moot point in that the school district is obligated by law to follow the state guidelines.
I'm glad to know that. I'm glad to know that about the money. There's been a lot of hype about it this week, and I don't want all our work to go for nothing, you know.
Yeah.
Thanks for answering my question.
Yeah.
I have done that research. I have read that and checked into it and all of the other. I just want to make sure that I was on the same page with what we're doing here.
Well, and I should actually let the superintendent answer that question rather than the consultant that doesn't have a job in a real school district. But did I get that right, Dr. Blasco?
We are aligned to the state. We had a meeting with Chris Rakedahl on Tuesday. The state of Washington receives between 5 to 6% of the overall education budget from the feds. And so would we feel the impact of that threat that we heard on Sunday? Yes. I mean, that's our Title I funding, and but it's 5 to 6%. And again, to Spencer's call, my oath is to the Washington State Constitution. And so we are bound by Washington state laws to follow that. I think the only other regulatory entity that we need to make sure that we continue to say is the Department of Health. And in our case, the Snohomish County Department of Health. So there's been a lot of questions, and I think, what happens when there's a COVID case in school? At that point, much the same, David Parator could talk about this, much the same as when there's a measles outbreak or you name it, and we have dealt with it within our, bringing children into places, is we defer to the Snohomish County Health District, and they guide our actions moving forward. So that is a pretty common question that's happening. And so I think drilling in a little bit more to your question, Janelle, I think I would say this: if the Snohomish County Health Department said you can't open schools, then we would go to Plan B, which is our 100% online distance learning 2.0. If things are safe and the guidance is there that things are okay, and we have the reopening guidance around masks and social distancing and sanitizing and all of those pieces, then we would move forward with our plan.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask Keith to put us into rooms and really dig into these questions that Kim has provided on that document. It's also on the agenda document around B1, and give us your best thinking because this is really important in terms of helping move this process forward. We're going to be in the breakout rooms for 30 minutes. So it's a good chunk of time for you to have some really deep conversations. And I encourage you to think outside the box. I know that's an old cliche, but think about creative ideas that you can provide. And, when you're thinking about these challenges, as Kim said, be creative about thinking about solutions as well, because that's going to help the process move forward in the most efficient way. And I'm just going to reiterate this: there's a ton of work that has to be done between now and the start of school to get this launched. So the more we can surface those ideas now, the better, and the earlier to give us time to really work through them in a thoughtful way. So we'll see you in 30 minutes. And Mr. Welton, you are in charge.
Okay, sir. 30 minutes is the timer has been set. Here we go.
Great. Wow, that was smooth.
Yeah, that went better. For some reason, Greg always seems to be problematic. I don't know why. He's in a room, but for some reason he's not there. He hasn't moved yet. Let me see if I can.
Oh,
See if I need to.
there he goes.
No, he's assigned. He just hasn't gone. I don't know. I don't know. Oh, you know what it is? Oh, so when you go to breakout rooms, you actually have to allow it. You actually have to say, yes, I'm ready to go to the
Yes,
breakout room.
so we have Jesse.
Yeah. So Jesse, this is Spencer. Spencer, this is Jesse. I wanted to introduce you, Spencer, to Jesse. So Jesse's one of my guys. He's my network analyst.
Great.
And Jesse's going to be moderating the meeting next Thursday because I'm on vacation. So yeah, so he's gonna moderate the meeting for us next week, and he'll be handling the things like breakout rooms and polls and all that good stuff. So
Very good.
yeah, so as we look forward to next Thursday, he'll be able to do that for you. And Jesse is more than qualified to do this, so he'll be in good hands.
Good afternoon, Spencer. I look forward to working with you. I'm pretty certain you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm using my laptop and I've got to hook up to a couple of monitors, and so my video is not live. Next week, I'll make sure it is live so that you can see me.
Great. Well, it's nice to meet you, Jesse. And will you be on? Let's see. Do I need his email so I can send him the agenda, or do you think Aaron will send those to you, Jesse?
I think if you could send me along anything, that would be great. I believe Keith sent an email to both you and I today asking about the polling questions. And so I believe you have my email at this point. Jesse Crowther, Crowther@monroe.win.edu.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I will make certain that you get the agenda so you know when the if and when there's going to be a breakout session, and then also I can send you the polling questions if we're going to do a poll.
Wonderful. Okay, that's great.
Great. Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you.
You too, Spencer.
Sorry about that, guys. I had a phone call from one of the people in one of the breakout rooms.
Well,
so, Spencer, did you want to drop into breakout rooms this time?
No, I don't think so. Well,
okay.
Yeah, I probably do. I probably should.
You do?
Yeah,
okay.
I probably should. And we'll probably do it like we did one of the times before. I'll go in for 3 or 4 minutes and then come out and then have you assign me to a new one.
Okay. I'll start at the bottom this time and assign you to, hang on just a second.
Great. Well, welcome back all. Yeah, this is the time for us to share what were salient points in your conversation in your room, things that are going to be really helpful for the work group to hear in terms of how to take plans further. So I'll just invite anyone who'd like to start. Michael, please.
All right. Well, our group talked about spacing first and foremost. With K through 2, 4 days a week, 14 kids per classroom. Where are we putting all the kids? Some of the unknown on that is kids opting out or families opting out, but can we really count on that? And we just don't know the numbers there, so that's a big concern. Also, concern would be transitions. Like, are there any transitions? There are concerns about kids being in one space for multiple hours during the day. And then for secondary, you kind of have to do transitions. So what classes maybe could be distance learning easier, like math, for instance, versus like a CTE science labs that, are more beneficial to be in person. So maybe there could be some, secondary considerations for, these type of classes really could be distance learning the full time. And then these kind of classes like cooking, really could be done in person. We're interested in the learning opportunities that can be done at home. We talked about earlier with the PE, the music, the science kits that could be done at home. I think that would be really beneficial for kids to kind of get to that 6 hours, but not have it be in one seat, in one, like, 4x4 space the whole day. We talked a bit about how full remote learning kind of seems to be inevitable, that, we'll likely switch to that. So we talked a lot about an option B1 where we have, like, since we've already kind of highlighted K2 and special ed being 4 days a week, maybe they're 4 days a week, but everyone else starts remote learning to start off. That way their spacing is fixed because, K2 can be in different classrooms throughout the school, while 3 through 5 and then the other classes, maybe they're distance learning, so that when there is that inevitable switch to everybody's remote learning, teachers have already planned. They already are used to the remote learning at that point. So it could be kind of beneficial there. And then you could even do the A/B half days for kids at that point. Transportation may be difficult. We talked a little bit about that, but we also don't know which families are going to opt out and drive to school, in addition to what families may opt out altogether. So we'd recommend a parent survey to see those numbers. And then we talked a lot about what happens if a staff member gets sick. It's difficult enough during normal times to get a sub for all positions. What's the quarantine going to look like? Are you going to quarantine the whole school or just the students? And there's a whole lot of mess around that I'm sure we're all thinking of. And I'm going to stop it there.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very thoughtful. And what I would say is, if you have things that echo what a previous group says, just do that very quickly, and then include any other things that are unique to your group. David.
So we talked a lot about kind of issues of engagement as a challenge for across this model, and especially we really had a focus kind of on the secondary. How are we addressing, we have two types of learners. We have those that are really self-starters and self-engaged, that are going to just hop on and do everything that's expected of them and more. How do we ensure that those students that aren't as self-engaged, or the self-starters, how are we ensuring that they're accessing things and really getting that rigor going beyond just the bare minimum? I'm logging in for my 1 hour Zoom meeting, I'm done for the day. How are we ensuring that they're really meeting those, getting to the standards? And to that also is, how are we guaranteeing that students are really getting those essential standards, those most salient points for each of their courses, to make sure they're really focusing in on the right things and making sure that they're learning at a high level. A challenge that we foresee for all teachers, it's always a challenge in September for teachers to assess their students where they're coming in their learning. And that's from just, as they've completed a full school year. We're going to have students that have even more gaps in their learning if they were not fully accessing the curriculum March through June. So how are they assessing where their students are where their gaps are, and then engaging them and getting involved into the work? Another thing that we talked about that really hadn't considered before, for a lot of our high school students who are doing really well with their credits and are approaching enough credits to graduate, do we identify those students and find a pathway for them to really get to those graduation requirements and graduate, very as quickly as possible, where that has not always been the case, in the district. So kind of looking at kind of that possibility of a way for students to, for those high achievers to complete early. We talked a little bit about, I'm sure other people will talk about, as kind of technology challenge, making sure we have that covered. And that was the main pieces that we addressed that were differing from Michael's group.
Great, thank you very much. Very thoughtful.
Spencer, I can go.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So we had some conversation around 3rd through 12th, as far as some of the ideas of trying to make sure that an A/B option for them doesn't end up feeling one size fits all. because K2 comes back and everybody's there and we're doing differentiating in person, but 3-12 could end up feeling very one size fits all, and there may be some students who do need additional days. The other thing issue with that was thinking about secondary classrooms have a higher caseload, so it sometimes makes the just breaking them into 2 smaller groups not actually as viable of an option. So some of our ideas for addressing that were, when we get the survey for families to see who's coming back, that might actually really help us, and looking at what types of spaces we're using for some of those, especially at 4th and 5th within an elementary school, with spreading out more of the K2. We had some discussion about the challenge of splitting kids into the A-B groups and where they would go, and the different ideas of using the alphabet, but then also making sure families who don't all have the same last name stay together, as well as creating balanced classes. We didn't have a solution for this one, but the puzzle is still going back and forth on the pros and cons around days of the week, 2 in a row or splitting across the week, and what actually creates the best continuity for kids. And then we had a long discussion about technology because we're not one-on-one. So how do we address the need for all kids to be on devices potentially every single day? For elementary, do we leave them all at home at all times? But then the challenge is, how do we train them on their devices and those kind of things? We also brought up the challenge of if we're looking at having to go to distance learning at any time, the need for laptops for teaching staff. We're hoping for further detail around what are we offering in person versus online, because that helps round out this plan a little bit. How long an in-person school day would be, and how will we create seat time within the online in-person schedules, so that we've created schedules that will account for all of the minutes. One of the big questions for us is, it's feeling urgent for us to consider at what point we're going to release a survey to parents, even if it's just, are you considering withdrawing and homeschooling for this year, distance learning all year, or distance learning until a hybrid option is available? That is my very brief summary of our thinking.
It's very thoughtful, very helpful ideas. Thank you. Thank you. Another group.
You want us to just jump in, Spencer?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. I would say overall our umbrella challenge focused on the idea of trying to wrap none of us had done the math on getting kindergarten through 2nd graders to a facility 4 days a week, how that impacts the 2 days of in-person learning per group. And I think our solution for that essentially a lot of our conversation went down the pathway of imagining a half-day solution, that if we're looking at half-day options, that provides the flexibility for a group who's going 4 days to spread amongst our facilities, and then our 2 days of in-person learning groups that they can then come at a different time. So that in and of itself brought up a whole pathway of challenges. So just that's the context of our conversation was that. I think one particular challenge we identified is our 3rd grade group, given the critical hinge point that 3rd grade is, in particular in the area of reading. And so our solution is, and we advocated for this at our last meeting, but we really feel strongly that we want to advocate that 3rd graders should be looked at. Can we look at them as part of the 4 days per week group as part of the K2 category? So again, not knowing the math behind that, but that was our idea around the solution for that. And one particular challenge was how to provide the sanitization if there's a group coming in the morning and a group in the afternoon, for instance, and just knowing there's lots of regulations around the types of cleaning supplies that could be used, and our solutions around that are how can we provide a process or create a process that can involve as many people as possible, regardless of student, staff, what type of role or job that they have. Can we find suitable cleaning supplies and processes that would just maximize the people who are in our buildings, and that's not necessarily something that's just contained to our custodial staff. And then one of the, trying to see what else. I think one of the challenges we identified was we know that any sort of remote learning experiences are going to disproportionately impact students whose parents are working or have to work outside of the home. So if we know this going in, what kind of solutions and partnerships can we create in the community with YMCA or Boys and Girls Club, or are there warehouse spaces or church buildings that we can use that then families could opt in for the remote learning periods where they're not necessarily in our facilities, but they're going to a location to be able to engage in the remote learning in a safe way that would then allow them to do those remote learning activities with maybe one of these partner groups to help support that that process. We talked about the challenge of our current online interaction limitations between staff and students. So the solution there is a desire to revisit the policies for online meetings around, in particular, I think called out was the need for counselors at times to meet with students one-on-one, and so having really some good clarity around the way that counselors can do that to care for the mental health of our students. And then I think the overall challenge that we kind of talked about at the end was it has to do with social emotional needs, but also crosses over around understanding our students' academic needs as well. And that really is just this idea of, even if we're having to go fully to remote learning, is there a phase-in plan that we can create that allows us to have a really targeted approach to get to know our students relationally, number one, to get to know their academic abilities and needs around, and kind of do some diagnostics. And then also a third category that we would want to look at there is just helping students tools of school, right? So helping get them up and running on Canvas and some of the online learning platforms, and really getting them clear and understanding some of those habits that they'll need to have, kind of some of the more soft skills things that they'll need to have for success in remote learning. So our idea there is really that even in we need to go pretty much remote learning context, is there a way to create a schedule for really small groups of kids? We're talking, maybe 8 to 10 per grade level, where it significantly limits over the month of September, significantly limits the number of people in the buildings, but it provides our staff the opportunity to know kids in that way. That yes, it might take us longer to ramp up in the school year, but that could buy us time in the long run, because it's a particular challenge that we didn't have in March, regardless of the model. In March, we already knew our kids. So, and I think that about covered kind of the list of challenges and solutions that we discussed.
Okay, thank you. Lots of really thoughtful ideas there. Thank you. Next, Blake, thanks.
A good deal of what we've shared was already discussed, but a couple of things that stood out with us. With our kids in K2 in school for the longest periods of time, and that group of kids also being the ones that just tend to always be sticky, for lack of a better way of describing their hygiene. The question came up of how do we give teachers and support staff the tools to engage with them in terms of behavioral supports, to not be trading masks, touching on each other. If I think of my own daughter, I just caught her licking the window the other day, in ways that are not punitive and in ways that are supporting our staff, because the other thing that came up in our group is just that people are really scared right now. I mean, I know we all know that, but scared people don't make good decisions. You've got your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and I kind of doubt that we're going to go to a place of fawn. when the second grader that our teachers love dearly is engaging in some really non-hygienic practices, and we need to make sure that we are supporting our staff so that they can support our kids effectively in ways that are non-punitive. For kids needing that third day of support, I think this was alluded to earlier, but I'm not certain, so I want to make sure I call it out. How do we identify those kids, I'm talking grades 3 through 12, systematically so that the quiet ones don't slip through the cracks, and it's not only the loud and the obvious ones that get caught? How do we deal with groups of kids that are shared spaces? And this is just a square footage issue. Specifically at Leaders, I can give the example that our para space, our art space, our special ed space, and our lunch space are all the same space right now.
Hmm.
And that, again, just square footage issue by and large. Last two, I think, that haven't been called out as explicitly, with grades 3 through 12 off-site for 3 days a week for most kids. How do we support those families in meeting their plurality of needs, from childcare to making sure kids are actually getting the learning done online, which then ties into staff. Hey, Kelly, I think you might have a noise coming through your end. How do we support staff in fundamentally shifting their pedagogical approach within this hybrid model? Because our traditional method, and even our method that we saw in the spring of what folks were wanting to teach and assess, and rightly so, in a pretty well historically entrenched way, will not work in a hybrid model. It's going to be a big lift to change hearts, minds, and practices. And how do we support people to do that in a way that we as a district are not coming in and saying, thou shalt change, which is just going to cause all sorts of fractured relationships, but also it can be empowering and inspiring change. And I think everything else in my notes has already been addressed. Yep.
Thank you very much. Great ideas. Yes, please, Jeff Presley.
Well, most of the things we said have been said. I'll just try and go quickly. I think our biggest puzzle piece for us is really getting the survey information out to know how many are coming, how many don't feel comfortable and wanting to stay at home, and maybe we create a virtual academy model for those families. They could register for that. And then we would know how many kids are coming. That'll help us with knowing the K2 or K3, or you can tell we all want our kids in school because we know that's where their best learning happens. So really getting the survey together and figured out for not only for families, but also for staff and their comfort level too. Talking about, transportation. I heard we were talking about, are they going to drive to school? Or are they going to take the bus? Will help us with that transportation question, as well as on whether or not they're going to do the online kind of virtual, to try it for the year, or the hybrid that whatever we come up with. For us, that was the biggest challenge is getting that out there. We don't know where to go totally until we have that. We just know they need more time. How do we get kids more time with us? Some need to come more often. I think we heard that a lot than others. Will K2 fit? How will they fit? Maybe K3 I even heard. You can see we want to have more. We talked about using alternative spaces for housing students in the community, not just the Y and Boys and Girls Club, but other organizations and community partners. Kind of tagging on to some of the things Jonathan said. We do have concerns around support staff, making teams. So we've got smaller groups of people. We even talked a little bit about the cleaning issue and maybe having more than custodial staff trained to be doing cleaning to help us with some protocols. We talked about people that have to be in small group, whether it's SLPs or other staff working with kids, basically high risk kinds of environments, but wanting to make sure we have those intervention structures and the safety of that. We do have concern about 3rd through 12th grade being all online, and there are kids that are going to need more instruction than that. And so we talked a lot about, and maybe the potential of an AM/PM model and how to create that where you do have the cleaning possibilities in place, but trying to just get more kids in front of staff members to help with feedback, intervention, discussion, all of those things that get lost in the online or lack of support online that goes on. I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Nice contributions. Thank you. Niall, please.
Yeah, a lot of what was mentioned by Michael, we echoed in our group. We had a lot of similar things with some of what Jonathan said as well. One of the things that we talked about that came up is the intervention students who need those intervention groups. And if intervention classes or times only happen on a Wednesday, that's not enough for a lot of those students. So how are we structuring interventions that can happen more than once a week? We also talked a little bit about spreading over multiple buildings and how that can become, there's a lot of challenges there. It's not just a transportation issue. So thinking about administration at different sites when schools are split among 2 or 3 different locations. And then also with the distance learning, how do we identify what subjects go to that full online, or which ones are those kind of more focused for being in person? And then we also talked a little bit about the logistics at secondary, and if we're still moving kids around, are we then creating a more unsafe environment for possible transmission, and working through some of those challenges. And a lot of what we said was also echoed, like I said, by Michael and then Jonathan.
Okay, thank you very much. Very helpful.
Spencer.
Yes.
Yeah, so Kayla and I, we talked mostly about transportation, imagine that. But some of the biggest challenges we have is that we're going to need firm rosters at the beginning of the year to really aid in the routing process and to even attempt to do any of the social distancing on a bus. And even, if we have a survey, initially we know that that's going to change as we get closer to September, as people's comfort levels change. So getting a really good idea of that. The screening process, if that's going to happen as the students are getting on the bus, if we pursue that route, we're going to have some kind of backup plan. If a student doesn't, pass that screening process and potentially doesn't have family at home any longer, what are we going to do there? The whole sanitizing issue, we could be sanitizing a bus 4 times a day. That's going to add time. I think it was already in the section there of a question that, some of our routes are really very tight right now. So we may have to adjust some start times to accommodate that sanitizing in between route segments. And then we're also looking at different types of sanitizing to really kind of mitigate the chemical buildup issue or anybody having potential reactions to that. But maybe looking at some green products that will help with that issue. So that's pretty much all we can add right now.
Yeah, great questions, great ideas. Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
When you wait until the end, a lot of your ideas have already been shared, which are all really good. We talked about the idea of students eating in the classrooms and the challenges with that, and about maybe having the shorter day so students could maybe just take their lunch home with them and eat it off-site so we wouldn't have lunchroom issues. When Mike mentioned the students that are having their temperature taken before they get on the bus, and if there isn't a parent home, then we also had the conversation about how encouraging parents to, have their children walk to school or ride their bikes. And what are we doing with those students that show up on a bicycle or show up having walked to school alone maybe, and then are we keeping them? How does that work? That was another one, and just the emotional side and dealing with students that could be upset because they're being turned away, and how we handle that is going to be very critical. Then we talked also about a lot of clarification from Brenda about the LAP and title and resource programs and how those work, which was very, very good for us to hear. Parent survey was also another one that was brought up, that once we get an idea of how many parents we're talking about, how many families, then that'll help us a lot for our planning. Then also about the 3rd through 5th grade classes being larger, and having some of those teachers being able to teach younger grades. How does that look if we're starting the year completely online? Do we just start out with that model in place, and then thank you, Kim. Thank you. So I think that was it that wasn't mentioned previous.
No, Pam, that was just something I hadn't thought of. So I wasn't saying yes, that was the answer, but no, like
Okay.
we have to, somebody write that down.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant yes, because it would be a transition in the year. And then, so are we overloading the 4 or 5 teachers for a whole year possibly if we didn't need to do that? Just something to think about.
I can go, Spencer. This is Brett.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Brett. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So one of the things on the secondary part of this, it talked about the different days and whatnot, and there was, I think, Wednesday listed for lots of different things. And one of the things that we talked about was really Wednesday, or whatever day it is for that that 5th day, should really be for support. So like tier 2 level support for kids and collaboration. All the other components listed on there, like staff meetings and IEP meetings, like those can happen on any day just like normal. So really wanting to carve out that 5th day for extra support for students in their learning, and then collaboration with staff. And we agree with what Blake talked about. Is, in my opinion, the most critical component of all of this, no matter what the model is helping our teachers flip the instructions so that the direct instruction, the content heavy stuff happens in the remote portion. And then when the kids are in the building, they can be getting the extra support they might need, or answering their questions, or discussing it with their peers. And that will help with the equity issue around students that don't have that kind of support at home. If we just do all that when they're here, which will be the tendency, and then to send them home, they're going to be at a disadvantage because they might not have that support there. So, and then things like, how are we providing feedback? How are we maintaining the social connection for kids on a weekly basis? Really building in a pyramid way of thinking in whatever model we choose. Like, in my mind, those are the most critical questions on the school side of things to be thinking through. The logistical questions. We talked about the high school having 8 classes for kids, which is a lot. What if kids took 4 classes for a quarter, and then the next 4 classes the next quarter, as opposed to trying to manage all 8 at one time? It's not ideal, but it might just minimize the stress for students that are trying to juggle 8 classes, because that is a lot. On non-COVID times, that's a lot of classes. So do we need to look at going to the minimum graduation requirements? Back to 24. I'm not usually one that would advocate for doing the minimum, but this is leaving a mark on all of us. So it might be worth considering. I don't know how, Blake, you feel about that, but just go to the 24, and then the kids that want to just do the minimum to graduate can. Those that have jobs and need to support their families can do that. Those who want to take more classes could also. I know that will probably impact staffing at some point, but it might be worth looking at. And then the last piece, Greg shared, the OSPI has a new, or like updated reopening template that just came out today. So he shared that, and we just were talking about how many just rabbit holes you have to start traveling down to try to solve all these issues, and thinking about like 800 high school students coming, if we're going like half the kids coming in, checking all their temperatures. Like, I mean, that's just one small piece, and there's just so many logistical components. My question is like, is this, and I hate to say this out loud, but like, for kids to come back a couple days a week, like, is all that really worth it? And for how long? Is this a few months, and then there's a vaccine, and then we're back full time? Like, I just wonder if all this is worth it. So the final piece really was coming back to, you know, can secondary survive remotely a little bit longer? Because the kids that I, you know, in my, just thinking about all of Monroe, that are most worrisome are the youngest students that need to learn how to read, like right now, because that's going to be their foundation for all of their years moving forward. What if we kept the secondary mostly remote or all remote, and then get those younger kids back in the building, even in smaller groups, and we could utilize our 3 secondary schools, just to provide more spaces for those younger students to get what they need early in their educational journey. So.
I'll go ahead and pop in. I had my hand raised, but I don't know if he's going to call on me. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we really tried to work a lot on the solution part of it, and a lot of the stuff you guys have already mentioned we went over. But one of the things we focused in on was if the K through 5 are going to maybe the closest building to them, or maybe the K through second, we just need to make sure that the families are all going to that same school. So for example, I have a 1st grader and a 3rd grader. So I don't want my 1st grader going to one building and a 3rd grader going to another. So that would be something to look into. Also potentially doing staggered times if we do have to put those 2 different groups at 2 different buildings, so that a parent could potentially go drop off at one building and then go to the other. In regards to students who are like 100% online versus some that maybe are going into the classroom, potentially having the same lessons online as in the classroom so they feel like they're a part of it, maybe even having the option of Zooming into the classroom so they're maybe a part of like the morning routine or a part of like a classroom read aloud. And we do know, I understand that it is easier for families to have the asynchronous schedule, but maybe there is that option in there to be a part of a classroom climate. The other option, I've heard you guys talk about the virtual academy kind of thing, which is a great idea, but it'd also be great to consider staff that might be a little bit worried about being in person with students, so that they might be the ones that we choose to do the strictly online academy. Another idea is potentially doing some sort of like lecture hall style for the older students, and have one teacher maybe teach that to multiple kids, but obviously space them out and do all that kind of stuff, like abide by the rules. But that might free up some teachers then if one teacher is responsible for maybe a large portion. We're thinking more like the juniors and the seniors, because they're not all of them are going to go to college, but we know a lot of them that is their path. And so maybe it's kind of showing them what college will be like, is that large lecture style hall. Again, I know the numbers, you have to watch how many are in one single room and that kind of stuff, but that would free up some of the teachers to maybe be working with kids that need more intervention, or even to teach a different grade depending on their credentials. And another idea is paraeducators to oversee a second classroom for each teacher, which again, credentials, I don't know how that would work. And then repurposing specialists, so PE, that kind of stuff. Looking creatively at our spaces, so what can actually be seen as a classroom? Can we use those cafeterias, libraries, hallways, all that kind of stuff for classroom space? And then I'm going to bring something up that I brought up in the last meeting. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but Snohomish School District does a parent partnership. And we didn't talk about this in my site group, but I do want to give this to everyone because as a parent, I know a lot of parents want this as an option. The parent partnership in Snohomish, they do the core classes taught at school, and then the family brings home practice sheets and stuff like that. And then the parents have the option to homeschool for art, science, social studies, that kind of stuff. And then they have to show evidence that the child is learning. And so the parents would be able to not have to necessarily do the online stuff. And I hate to say it, but it was not necessarily the best learning experience for my children. And I know a lot of other parents are thinking the same thing, and not every family has the ability to homeschool. I understand that, but to have that option there would be fantastic.
I'm not sure if we lost Spencer there, but I'm not hearing him come back in. So
He's still there, or he was just a second ago. He didn't have video, but he had audio. But I think we may have just lost him, just as I was saying that.
are there any other groups that haven't reported out? Trying to do my best to flip through there. I think all groups have reported out. So one of the things I would just comment on from Kaylee's last comment is we do have a parent partnership program. It's either the second or third largest in the state with Sky Valley Education Center. And as is Karen's way, when she, and I don't see her on the call today, I think she might be out of town. One of the components that they have built is in response to COVID is a more defined, and it's I smile because Karen, she's a very unique character, is a Zoom free parent partnership opportunity. And so there will be information that will come out as we progress in this. And we just wanted that.
Sorry, can I interrupt
go
on
ahead.
that though? So the reason for me that I bring that up is I still want the opportunity for my kids to go to that school. Like, for example, I want my kids to go to Chain Lake. I don't want to have to pull them and put them in Sky Valley. So if we had this option of, hey, they can still go to their school for these 2 days a week, but then when they're at home, they're maybe not doing online. They're doing more of a worksheet type thing. They're doing a homeschool program for their science, their social studies, that kind of stuff. It's just it's a creative thing, and I understand it's very hard to juggle for teachers if you have some kids doing online and some kids having their parents homeschool them in this one portion. But I know eventually one day kids will go back to their schools, and I don't want to have to transfer my kids all over the place. So that's the only reason I bring that up. It's a super creative, very challenging idea, but I don't want to do Sky Valley. So that's why I bring that up.
Excellent. Excellent. So we might, let's see, we have an iPhone coming in, so maybe it's Spencer. It's always a risk, Keith, to just let a random iPhone come in. But
right? But it's him.
It is Spencer.
Him.
I am so sorry, everybody. I lost my internet connection. Where are we?
I think all groups have presented. We ended. Kaylee ended and shared with some information from the Snohomish district around kind of a hybrid of a hybrid model. I think as far as some. If we're able to be back in class physically, and then there's a component that maybe that component isn't online, maybe that component is a homeschool side of the piece. So we just ended talking about that,
Great.
Spencer, but I think all groups reported out.
Great. And so this would be the time for you and Kim to maybe we're running short on time here, but just to maybe hit a couple of the highlights of what you heard that you're going to take forward to the core work group.
So one of the things that kind of consistently came up is and I'm looking at Jeff Presley right now, so I'm going to try to capture what Jeff said, is that there's obviously a desire to understand what the capacity is in our facilities. And in order to do that, there's this other unanswered question as far as, what is our, and I'll call it an attrition rate, right? Like how many of our parents are absolutely adamantly not going to return? And it seems we're getting to that point of understanding. I think there's some concern around surveying too soon and maybe presenting a situation that people could say, well, this is what we're going to do. And trust me, those emails are coming to my inbox, because as other districts are surveying, parents in our community are saying, see, Snohomish knows what they're doing. See, Marysville. And as I'm having conversations with superintendents, it's like, no, we're not even close yet. But it has the appearance of being done because there's There's proposals being put out there. But I think the information from our families is going to be important in the next very short timeline of determining who's absolutely adamantly not coming back. I think that will help us to understand then capacity for, can we fit all K1 in our 5 elementary schools? Are we going, how can we utilize Wagner Center? Jeff Rasmussen, Boys and Girls Club, has reached out this week and said, hey, we have some space that could be available if the district is able to utilize our space. We have some. Are there other partners in the district that we could expand the footprint with? So I think that's something that we've heard is, I think each of us, when we stop and think about, and I said this earlier, distance learning looks very different for a 5, 6, 7-year-old than it does for a 12, 13, 14-year-old. And while there's challenges at both stages, there's a lot of challenges in really understanding, teaching reading and teaching early mathematics is challenging enough. And switching the modality of that and doing that online tends to force us to think, can we create some more opportunities? I think we heard from a number of groups about, and not just primary kids, but what about our students that are behind grade level and in our vernacular, in our district, tier 2 and tier 3 students? Are we going to be able to provide more support, and or maybe framing that question of how will we provide more support? We heard a lot of discussion around technology, and it's true. We didn't pass our technology levy. And, we, in my breakout group, we had a long conversation about some of the machines that we purchased were initially purchased 6 years ago when we first got access to our tech levy dollars. And so those machines are starting to become dinosaur machines, right? In that 6-year period of time. Are teachers going to have the tools to be successful in this world of distance learning? Our platform has been Chromebooks, and that's been very challenging. We have a number of teachers on the screens today that will attest to the fact that some of the challenges that they ran into in distance instruction had to do with technology, and what is a good answer for that? We heard a lot of groups talking about, and I understand Brett's. I'm with you there, Brett. There are a lot of rabbit holes, and one rabbit hole that he brought up was the attestation. We heard Mike talk about that just for the busing, is how do we ensure that as one of our primary directives of safety, part of that safety is how do you ensure that the people that are choosing, the students that are choosing to come to school are asymptomatic, that our staff is asymptomatic, that they're not. They're not feverish, and that's a real shift in our culture. Many of us have in the past, and I'll raise my hand and say I'm one of them. Sniffles, cough, cold. Many of you see me at work, probably shouldn't have been at work sick, and that's just not something that we can do safely anymore. So those challenges, and then really working on. I think we heard a lot of people talk about distance learning 2.0, and I appreciate the parents that have spoken up and said, I have to be honest with you, it wasn't great for my kid, didn't really work, and I have, those emails are washing into my inbox now as well, with people as we get closer to September 9th, really being concerned about what that's going to look like for their child and their academic progress moving forward. So. A lot of things to address and a lot of things to move forward. Kim, anything I missed?
I think what I'm hearing is just from the most concerning, or what I heard the most, to what I didn't hear as much of or hear as much concern is, one is the technical, transportation facilities, cleaning, all of that stuff. Then the next one I think is really kind of the concerns about social emotional, climate, culture, the reading, writing, math, and all of that we know is important, but there's also another piece to this that we want to make sure that we're addressing. And I know it was a rough start to our continuous learning 1.0, but I think there's a lot of confidence in our schools and our teachers and our leaders. And I know that that's something that we're going to be able to work on. But it really is interesting. I'm hearing more of technical concerns versus kind of the adaptive. And I think that says a lot about our teaching and learning in this district.
Great. So really productive session today. A lot of information that was very, very helpful. today, and the work group can continue moving forward. Because I can't see everybody because of my current reduced circumstances with internet, I would just turn this over to Justin probably to wrap up. And just the only things that I'll say are we are back together next Thursday with a further iteration of this plan with more detail coming back to you that then you will be able to provide more feedback on. And we're going to keep working towards refining this process. And if you can give us some feedback about the session, including the facilitator getting kicked off the internet, that's totally fine. And I just want to thank you for your good work today. And I will turn it over to Justin to close out today.
And I would just be brief and just suggest that as you've seen is we rely on not only the discussion that takes place in this time, and it's just amazing how fast 2 hours goes. You know, you think about a 2 hour meeting and it's like, whoa, we got a 2 hour meeting. And then all of a sudden we're here and it's 6:05. So please take the time to put your ideas and thoughts on those reflection sheets. Those are things that we're leveraging, we're looking at, we depend on that feedback. You know, your honesty in there, you know, these are things that if you don't speak up and say it, we're not going to know it. We can't guess what you're thinking. We can't guess what your experiences were. I appreciate those of you that have done that to this point, and I would encourage each of you to do that, whether you're a staff member or a parent. All of that is very helpful. What are the things that you're thinking about that didn't come up today? You know, I want to close with that. What are the things that you think we should have been talking about that didn't get talked about? You know, that's a question that when I was in HR, that's something that we asked at the end of every interview. What's something you thought we were going to ask you that we didn't ask you that you want to talk about, that you want to let us know? And I think that's an important question for each of us. The template is out. OSPI has released the template. So there's more specificity on the challenge of opening schools physically. So you are all, I appreciate each of you, and my language is I appreciate you all geeking out about opening schools with us. we need all of you here with us geeking out about this because we need your thoughts. And so if you have an opportunity to see that document from OSPI, I think that would be very informative to you of the things that all of us in education are worrying about right now and moving forward, and take a look at some of those things that we're going to have to address and we're going to have in our plan, and you know, the Snohomish County Health District. And again, please talk to people around you, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, socially appropriately, right? Stay safe. We appreciate each of you. Thank you for being here, and we really look forward to continuing this work with you next Thursday.
Thanks all. Well, there we go. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Have a good break.
Can you stick
Thank
with
you.
me for just a minute after this? No more than 3 minutes, maybe?
Sure,
Please.
as long as Keith and Jesse can